Welcome to Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. This season, we're reading Mat Cauthon's perspective. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 15, our first Mat episode in Lord of Chaos. I'm your co-host, Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Cimaris, a scholar from Ilion. This, right now, is your spoiler warning. All of our loyal listeners already know that this is a reread podcast, but to you new listeners, be warned that we may drop a spoiler at any moment without any further warnings.
And I'm going to get us started today with a summary of part of Chapter 5. So this episode is a little strange because in our reading schedule, we've come upon this monster of a 30-page exclusively Mat point of view chapter in Lord of Chaos. So we decided to split it pretty much right down the middle, and I'm going to take a synopsis of the first half. Instead of pausing for commentary, I think instead I'm going to turn it over to Giskel to synopsize the second half. So you're just going to get synopsis of the whole chapter thrown at you, and then we'll just spend the rest of the time doing, as we do, riffing, going off topic, discussing our points on the chapter. So I'll get us started with the first half of Chapter 5, A Different Dance. Mat is in Mayron, a formerly Kyrianan city right across the river from the Andoran Erangil that we visited in The Dragon Reborn. We begin the chapter in the Golden Stag, the second best inn in the town. It's beautifully furnished and staffed almost exclusively by beautiful women, but the food isn't that great. Civil war and an unnaturally long, hot, dry summer will do that to a city. It's so hot that Mat's attempts to drink away his troubles are foiled. He keeps sweating out the alcohol too quickly. He's not satisfied with the music either. It's not the musicians' fault, though. They're doing their best to play a song that he requested, hummed, and clapped out for them, but no one has heard it in 2,000 years. Mat notices Talmanas, Darrett, and Nelesian are arguing about how they can win some of their money back from him, so he butts in to find out what their plan is. Not at cards, nor dice, but they decide horse racing might work. Mat smiles and takes them up on the offer, not disclosing his extensive personal experience with horse trading. A serving woman, Betsy Sylvan, who Mat has had his eye on, comes to refill his wine glass, asking him lots of questions. First, are you a lord? No, of course not, he responds. Well, why do you wear this? She pulls back his scarf. Oh my, did somebody try to hang you? Why, because you stole this? As she plucks at his medallion and he snatched it back. Was it for passing yourself off as a lord? Was it because you knew too much? He didn't even have time to get a word in while all these questions tumbled out of her. Meanwhile, Darrett and Elysian are laughing aloud at him, while Talmanas is dryly mocking him. They often get a kick out of his luck not applying to his chances with women like it does with dice or cards. He replies something to the effect of, more like I was hanged for knowing too little. I knew too little then, but I know a lot now, so you might say I was hanged for knowledge. Surprisingly, Betsy isn't amused. Just speak plainly, she implores. I'm not into that wittiness you're trying right now. So, out of other options, he compliments her lovely face and asks her to dance. He takes her through the steps that get more complex as they go along, but she's a fast learner and is delighted by this dance. Mat is taken back in his memory to another time he danced this same pattern dance with a wave mistress of the Athan Mier under a crystal dome at the court of Shemal in Coromanda, one of the 10 nations. Soon after that dance, he would learn of the first Trolloc raids that launched the Trolloc Wars, under which all of the 10 nations were crushed and nearly forgotten. But he put that out of his mind. Just for tonight, he could dance with Betsy? He almost tripped them both as he came back to in the Golden Stag, but he caught himself in time to rescue the dance as he reflects on how much those old memories are a part of him now, and what he gained from his trips through the Terangrial. He wasn't lying to Betsy when he said he was hanged for knowledge. He was an idiot at the time to go jumping through those doorways without knowing what he was doing, and he makes a vow not to leap without thinking like that again. Those memories, though, he wouldn't be commanding these forces if not for them, which he doesn't like on one hand because he doesn't want to be any bloody hero, but he's starting to see the advantages of on the other hand. Without an army, he would be a naked target to the Forsaken, as he puts it. They approach the end of the dance, and Betsy is so delighted, saying she felt like she was in a royal palace. Thinking of royalty and all of the things that he got from the doorways and the Finn, suddenly Mat blurts out, "Does the daughter of the 9 moons mean anything to you?" Mat is relieved that it doesn't. He hopes not to have to settle down and marry for a long time yet, and he knows it will happen someday. The foxes were right, since he was already hanged and revived, as they had predicted. He quiets Betsy and asked her to another dance, this time a country dance from the Third Age, so maybe it won't have so much baggage attached to it. But just then, the Terran lordling Adorian popped in and reminded Mat it was time to make his inspection. He inspected something different every day with his troops, just to keep all his men on their toes, and today it would be the drinking rooms. He hands Betsy some gold to tip the musicians with and says he'll be back to dance again, but she admonishes him with a wagging finger before he leaves in confusion. She doesn't seem as keen on his intentions just now, but he thought the dancing was working. As they headed out into the town, Mat sees Kyrian and refugees hoping to cross the river Aranon into Andor. Mat can feed and clothe them, give them soap and other necessities, but unfortunately, what they really want, passage out of Kyrian, he cannot give them. When his soldiers see him walk by outside, they send up a cheer. He's pretty recognizable with his hat and staff, and there's lots of rumors about that hat and why he doesn't wear armor and where he got the staff. But the truth is that this regular old hat reminds him to be careful to not need armor, and none of them could have guessed that his spear was made in the Age of Legends with the One Power. As he checks on members of the band throughout the town's taverns, he reflects on the Red Arms who acted as police to keep the fighting under control, and on the other diverse sights in the town. There were gleemen throughout the inns reciting the hunt for the horn, and rough-looking figures from all nations who must be hunters for the horn. Mat wished one of those hunters had found it instead of him. As far as he knew, it was holed up in the White Tower somewhere, where only a dozen Aes Sedai knew about it at the most. And Giskel, why don't you pick up with a synopsis of the rest of the chapter?
Part 2 takes up with Mat and walking through, continuing to inspect the troops. Adorian is with him and begins asking after rumors of their impending orders. Adorian had noticed that the farriers had begun checking the teams for the supply wagons, and he also had heard rumors that the Lord Dragon had been in town the day before. Mat wished to himself that the rather intelligent Adorian could be put in charge of the other Terrians, rather than Lord Elysian. Mat denied having seen the Lord Dragon, though internally he began remembering the visit last night from Rand. A slash of light had appeared in the room, scaring him half to death. It opened up into a traveling gateway, and Rand had come walking through, with the palace of Camelin clearly visible behind him on the other side. Rand had seemed agitated. His conversation kept skipping around from battle tactics against Samael, to finding and killing the other Forsaken, to uniting all of the nations, even asking how you knew when you were in love. Well, Mat's thoughts were still in the jumble as they continued inspecting the troops that were quartered all throughout the town. So much, though, that he seemed to welcome the excitement when he heard raised voices ahead and ran to see what was going on. What he found was a crowd circled around two Mirandians, who were hunters of the horn, and who were shaking a young boy. The men were furious that the boy had touched one of the men's horses. When one of them threatened to kill the boy, Mat cracked him hard in the groin with the butt of his spear. When the second Mirandian moved to intervene, Mat hit him twice and felled him as well. Adorian had grabbed the boy, and Mat turned to him as the Red Arms came in to deal with the Mirandians. He was, in Mat's estimation, perhaps the ugliest child Mat had ever seen. End quote. Mat then passed a few words on with the Mirandian's frantic servant, with the warning that the two of them should get out of town right now. Speaking to the boy for a moment, Mat got his name. He discovered that Oliver was a headstrong and impudent little boy of 9, though Mat thought he looked more like 6, and that he was an orphan. Mat charged Adorian to take him to the inn and see that Oliver got a good meal, a bath, some new clothes, and shoes. He learned very quickly that he had to speak to Oliver and not above him. Unspoken was that Adorian was to also find someone to take care of the boy, with gold to interest them. Just then Estion came running up and interrupted that a seafolk ship had docked down at the river. Mat sent him to run back for a boat, hoping to hire the much larger craft to carry their cargo, and he stopped when he got inside of the river, used his looking glass to assess the situation. Yes, it was a seafolk ship, all right, but it had just dropped off a wave mistress and her swordmaster at the docks on the other side of the river, in Erangel, in Camelin. Then the ship began pulling up anchor and set sail once again. So after finishing his rounds, Mat settled back at the Golden Stag, where once again there was dancing. just country music this time. The innkeeper must have worked out a schedule, for all of the serving girls took turns joining in the dances. Everyone except Betsy. She fetched wine for no one but Mat, and danced with no one but Mat. But every time they stopped and he tried to kiss her, she began talking and turned her head so that he never got to kiss her on the lips. At least not until hours after midnight, when the dancing was almost through, and Mat gave her a golden crown to buy herself something nice. She kissed him then. Mat went back to the back wall with Talmanis, Darryd, and the Elysian, and announced that the band would move out at first light, which was only about 2 hours away. Then we start up again after some arguing from the men. The next morning, Mat is watching the band as they move out of town. He had arranged the band into different squadrons, all of similar sizes, but made up of men from different countries. He was trying to tie their loyalty to the band, not just to their local lord or native land. There had been a lot of grumbling about it, but it was working. They sang Jack of the Shadows as they marched. Mat had set a goal of 35 miles per day. Impossible, most of them thought. So Mat gave his leaders a quote from Kumadrin. Attack on ground where your enemy believes you will not, from an unexpected direction at an unexpected time. Defend where your enemy believes you are not, and when he believes you will run. Surprise is the key to victory, and speed is the key to surprise. For the soldier, speed is life. End quote. Mat watched them and thought of how things were going according to the plan, perfectly. A hasty departure on a short notice, just as though they were trying to sneak away south, but certain that all the spies in town knew about it. Samael would know that the band was hurrying, and that the attack would begin as soon as Mat and the band arrived. Thus ends chapter 5.
This chapter really stands out in my memory. It's not one of those with iconic Mat action, but it does have some really important Mat growth in it. I mostly remember the dancing scene and the sort of flashback that happens during it and just how beautiful and cinematic that could look. But there's so much Mat growth packed into this chapter. I think that's why it's so long and it wasn't broken up. It's the first update of a Mat POV in this book, so he's got to catch us up in case we had been reading as these books come out on who Mat is and what he's been through and everything. He shows us many different ways that Mat seems to have grown up quite a lot. His thoughts are different, and I can get into that in more detail, but just broad strokes, his thoughts are a little different in just the way that they're written. He shows more compassion, he shows more responsibility and empathy. Still is the same Mat in a lot of ways. I mean, he still is kind of roguish, he still really enjoys spending time with the ladies, he still enjoys wealth, and he still doesn't enjoy seeking out responsibility, but he still doesn't like being still for very long. But he has changed in a lot of important ways in the way that he's thinking about his role in the world now and his responsibilities to other people. I'm just seeing a lot of growth, and I'm proud of him in this chapter.
I agree. I believe this chapter is pivotal in many ways. I had not recalled it as clearly as I had many of the other chapters or many of the other big Mat moments. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, I believe I had completely forgotten this chapter until you brought it up a few episodes ago. But just in thinking about it, he has taken on so much responsibility because at this point, he's not getting caught up in a battle accidentally. He was convinced by Rand to lead the band down to Tyr, to very clearly have a show of force against Samael. They are leading thousands and thousands of soldiers into Ilion. And when the band arrives, of course, then Mat will be the leader of that military move. And so it's very, very clearly going to be a huge war, and it's all focused right now on Ilion. This is a gathering of forces that has not been seen since Arthur Hawkwing's time. A massive amount of soldiers and men and supplies and wagons and things moving in to keep this going. There are thousands and thousands of the Aiel coming in. Of course, the Aiel being such great warriors. Samael knows all this, and it's all intended to draw his focus on this huge army. In my opinion, this is very much like Aragorn bringing in his forces against the gates of Mordor in order to pull Sauron's eye away from what Frodo was doing in The Lord of the Rings. Very similar. They are doing a feint But this one is on such a huge scale. And Mat did not accidentally find himself in this situation. He was convinced to knowingly and willingly lead troops against one of the Forsaken. That takes a lot of growing up. That takes a lot of maturation.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, do you remember when he was rescuing the girls from the Stone of Tyr, afterwards he found out Bela was one of the Forsaken, and he's like, Light, I wouldn't have gone in there if I'd known that. I guess I would have, but I don't know. He was so much more intimidated, and now he's taking an army against one.
Right. And he knows that this is partially a feint. This is to draw Samael's attention so that Rand can take him on one-on-one. But at the same time, there's still going to be a war. There's still going to be fighting. Mat's still going to be at the head of an army. One of the great generals of his time, or at least he will be. He's had to take on a lot of responsibility that he did not want to take on, but we see him doing it. We don't see him running away. We see him stepping up to the challenge. From what I understand, it took probably several hours of talk for Rand to convince him to take this job. He certainly did not want it. He certainly did not ask for it. But I think he saw the necessity for it. As well, just as a kind of a general topic of conversation here, so far, Lord of Chaos is one of my favorite books in this series. On this reread, it really stands out to me. And much of that is just the beautiful Mat moments that we're left with. I'm in Lord of Chaos, much further along into the book than this, but there's so many times when I'm driving down the road laughing out loud, literally. Not just for a moment or two, but I get almost in tears at times, and most of that is because of our boy Mat. When he goes to Saladar to rescue Egwene and the girls, and finds out she really is Amerlin, and that is just so hilarious to me. And there are so many smaller moments as well. There are quite a lot of them in this book. To me, this book does stand out as being more serious in some ways, a little less dark in other ways, but funnier than many of the other books.
Yeah. I like how much you focused on Mat's responsibility just now, because that's one of the things that I noticed, but I wasn't even thinking quite as much about the responsibility of leading troops into a battle like this willingly. It, for some reason, didn't dawn on me that for the first time he's not trying to run away. And I really do think this is the first time we see that.
I agree. Yeah, it is.
But he has a different attitude entirely. His thoughts even are printed differently. He's not grumbling and complaining as much about his responsibilities in his thoughts. There's the occasional, you fool, and he wasn't sure if he was talking to the Mirandian or to himself. There's the occasional little sprinkle of what we're used to in there. Maybe the occasional thought. He just sort of sighs about having to get up and do inspections, but he goes and does it. He doesn't have this whole internal monologue kind of berating himself about responsibility. He does have a I don't want to be a bloody hero kind of thing in there a couple of times, but for the most part, his thoughts are, I don't want to say more on track because he's still daydreamy, but we don't even see this printing difference that we used to see from his very first point of view, where we had these three different types. We have plain text of just his wandering pre-conscious thoughts that maybe he's not consciously thinking about but are kind of floating around. Then he's got these more emphasized conscious thoughts that are like a full-on sentence that he's consciously thinking that's in italics. And then we have the conclusion of those that tends to happen out loud. It's either this like bodily action or a statement that he speaks out loud. And either way, it seems to surprise him as much as it does the reader. We don't have that in this chapter. We've got some moments of quick action, like when he just immediately hits the guy with his spear to begin with, as soon as he realizes what they're suggesting doing with Oliver. But his thoughts have this more structured, sober kind of tone to them than they've had before. He just feels more responsible even when you're reading his thoughts. He's more focused. He's kind of more together.
I agree. He's more general Mat rather than scoundrel.
Yeah.
At this point. And you see the tables being turned on him somewhat. I didn't really catch it until you were reading the synopsis of the first part of the chapter, but when Betsy comes up and she's talking to him, she is like old Mat. She's talking real fast. He can't get a word in edgewise. Instead of just asking about the silk scarf he has around his neck, she has to reach over and pull at it and see the scar and grab the medallion. And it's just, It's like the things she's doing, if she's doing it and saying it so fast, you can't keep up with it. You can't respond to it.
Like her thoughts
That
are
was
probably
very-
not even keeping up with it. It's just sort of, she's
Right.
just sort of grabbing at stuff.
Yeah, that was very Matt-like in a way, that his actions were getting ahead of his thoughts even. You see the tables turned on him that way. Now, what I had thought of, the tables being turned on him, prior to this was, as you said, he doesn't grumble about responsibility, but people are grumbling to him about responsibility. And in a way, you kind of see a wryness to his thoughts, almost not a mockery of it, but I get the impression that he is listening to him and kind of rolling that around in his mind. Yes, I would complain about that too.
Yeah.
But they're still going on with it because he's the leader. He's the one everyone brings their problems to. Because even before, in the last book, he could at least bring things to Rand or complain to Rand. At this point, there's no one to complain to. So I like that the turning of the tables here, that he is having to receive the complaints. Betsy is treating him as the way he's treated other people, continuing to deflect questions and things. There's no way to counter that. When someone is that touchy and talky and is moving so fast, you can't keep up with it with your thoughts, much less try to counter what they're doing and saying. And I found this.
Yeah, I totally didn't catch how many tables are being turned on Mat here. I really like that. I also like seeing how compassionate he is, and we had seen the seeds planted for this in previous chapters, but it was always wrapped in these other layers. It's almost like he was protecting himself from having very genuine feels for people, you know?
Yes.
He doesn't seem to be doing that so much now. I don't feel that there's all these kind of defensive layers on top of him having any kind of sentiment or tender feelings. I don't think it's an accident that this chapter with so much Mat growth in all these different points is occurring right across the River Aranon from Erangel, where he was in The Dragon Reborn with Tom. And that's the first place we see him see refugees right after he had been throwing a bunch of food overboard. We see him throw some gold at a refugee family, saying to himself that it's because he couldn't stand their crying. Also talking about how altruism is stupid and you shouldn't do stuff like that, right? And then we also see him give supplies and money to Aludra on her way because he starts to feel bad that she's not going to have anywhere to sell any fireworks and make any money for a while. And she and Tom both tell him how foolish he is and everything. Here, we get to see him doing those types of things on a much larger scale and without all of these reservations and qualifications that he used to have about it. He's not having to explain to himself some macho rogue reason why he would throw money at refugees. Instead, he's organizing this larger scale effort to feed them. And we see this when he's talking with Adorian about whether the soap deliveries had made it. So not only is he feeding them, he's providing toiletries. It's just interesting to see how much he has grown in his compassion for people. I don't know if Rand ordered him to do the humanitarian aid part of what his army is doing right now. We don't see that on the screen anywhere. It wouldn't surprise me now, seeing how much Mat has grown, that that's something he would take on willingly, having seen all these refugees and understanding how dangerous hungry refugees could potentially be. And I don't mean to say that in the way that a lot of people are scared of refugees as being like a terrorist threat or something like that. I mean that in the case of a place can be politically unstable when people's basic needs aren't met. And I think Mat understands that very well. And so not only is this a compassionate move, but it's a smart one politically to make sure he's not going to have any riots and mobs on his hand. I think it's also really interesting that he's leading this kind of police force in Mehron too. He's bringing more order to whatever place he's coming into, and that's new for him as well. He's usually a very chaotic figure, right? So it's interesting that he's turned the tables and he's bringing order now. And back to the compassion piece, I just love seeing how empathetic he is for Oliver. And again, without all these layers explaining why, he's not really distancing himself much from this feeling. When Oliver speaks up about not wanting to be talked down to, Mat physically gets down on his level so he can look the kid in the eye and says, I know how you feel. I don't like being talked over either. And we have talked about how dismissed Mat had been at home.
Yes, exactly.
And so it's awesome to see him acknowledge that and be able to extend that empathy and that compassion to somebody else in a similar situation, because we could imagine a younger Matt not being able to handle these uncomfortable feelings and maybe not even acknowledging how he identifies with a person in a situation like that, and sort of not lashing out, but maybe deflecting. And it's just really cool to see that he's not doing that here.
Absolutely. If I can run off on a side trail for just a moment,
for sure,
because that's what we do in the Wheel of Mind. You see, many people have terrible childhoods. They have things that happen to them that they're completely beyond their control, things that tend to become generational.
Mm-hmm.
If you're ignored or treated badly or even abused as a child, people have a tendency to do those same things. They don't often know how to break that cycle and become something different from what they saw growing up. They may hate that. They may detest the way they were treated, but they often repeat those same patterns because that's what they grew up with. It's what they know. So to have someone who, like Matt, was not mistreated, but often not believed and was not paid a lot of attention to, always considered to be a bit of a fool, to have him stop and realize, I'm not going to do the same things to this boy, is really big, because everybody has a choice. If you can just stop and be cognizant of the things you've gone through, the faults you have as a person, and can either say, I'm just going to continue with these things, or like a lot of people, ignore them. But the better thing to do is to say, this is what I've gone through. Now, how can I make someone else's life better? It doesn't have to just be your child or your immediate family. After you've grown, it can be your coworkers, friends. How are you going to break that cycle and make things different? So Matt took some mild trauma from his childhood and turned it into a positive thing for a young man that had no one. I found that very...
Yeah. I'm just so much more proud of our boy here than I have been before. This is one of his better chapters, for sure. There's times where I'm real disappointed in him, like when he's mean to Rand and stuff. But here, he's really grown up. Yeah.
Accepted a lot. And other things, too. My first read through this, I was a little suspect of him, like, handing all the gold to Betsy.
Oh, yeah.
Tip the musicians. Well, that's a lot of money to be tipping musicians. And I kind of, at first, had the thought he's trying to tempt her into be basically prostituting herself. And nothing could be further from the truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things you see about Matt. He will spend time with a woman who will give herself to him. But he's not willing to lower himself to pay for that, or even lower her to pay for sex or companionship or whatever. Instead, he wants to earn that. Now, he may want it to be temporary, like a lot of people do, but he wants to earn that. He wants for her to enjoy herself as much as he enjoys himself. When he gives gold to a woman like that, there really are no ulterior motives. Now, if that impresses her and she still wants to be with him, fine. But if it doesn't impress her and she doesn't want to be with him that way, it's still fine.
Yeah, he's not...
And I do like that about him.
Mm-hmm. He's not hoping for that amount of money to be coercive in any way, to change her mind. He is only interested in people who are fully consenting with what's going on. And if all that is just... come sit in my lap for a while and then that's the end of it, he's okay. Or just a dance, and that he is okay. He can be disappointed, but he's okay with moving on and doing something else and just enjoying if he only gets a smile here and there when he tells somebody she's got pretty ankles. Yeah, I think it's clear from this interaction, like you pointed out, and many others, that Matt's never pushy when it comes to women. He backs off if it seems that they're not interested. Betsy is a little kind of hot and cold here. He's not exactly sure what she wants, so he's intrigued enough to kind of keep going. But it's not that she's ever very clearly refusing wanting to be around him or engage in this banter or whatever. So I think he's about as unproblematic a rogue as we could ever find. He's not going to be #canceled anytime soon. I think he's in pretty good shape. And it's also interesting that you brought up the money. I didn't actually think of that because, I can't find evidence that our characters know about sex work. I'm not sure if that exists in this world. There may be implications about different types of violence and stuff like that, but there's not... No one ever mentions a brothel being in town. There may be, very much more subtle implications, but I'm just not sure if if that's even here. I think somebody asked Robert Jordan about that once, and his position on it was that because there's so much gender equality in Randland, that people don't feel like women don't end up being pressured into work like that. Like they don't feel the need to because they're a little more liberated. Now, I'm not sure that's exactly how it works. Now, in some places that are a lot more economically disadvantaged, you do see more people engaging in sex work when they don't have other choices, for sure. But you also do have people who choose that type of work as well.
Exactly.
So,
that's what
that's
what I was started to say, that I can't remember it being explicitly shown or talked about in the story.
Yeah.
But at times it seems to me there are hints of it, but I've not really noticed it in my reread. So I may get all the way through and discover that I was wrong, that it's nowhere in the book.
Yeah, I think
want to think that it's at least hinted.
Well, it's easy to assume that because it's so similar in parts of the environment to many other fantasy series that you probably just kind of we just sort of fill in the blanks and assume that there's brothels in the seedy parts of town. You know?
we expect it to be there. And let's face it, similar to your statements earlier about the refugees, desperate people can do a lot of things you don't expect because they're trying to survive. In fact, they'll do a lot of things they never thought they would do. Large groups of refugees gathered, as we see here in Meron, could very well turn violent because they're desperate. So the things that Matt does in trying to provide for them, trying to provide just a small amount of relief, it doesn't give them what they want. It was very clearly stated they wanted out of there. They wanted an entirely new life. They didn't want to try to settle in Meron, and they wanted to get very far away from war. His relief there, it's very altruistic. He's really trying to help people. And I think that comes largely from his different perspective of being a leader. Now, he may continue to say, I'm no bloody lord, but he's in charge of a lot of people, and he's trying to make lives better. So he's carrying out the function of a lord, even if he was not born into royalty, not born with a title, and has not been given an official title.
Yeah, I like how you brought up that he is fulfilling kind of the ideal function of a lord. We saw Moiraine reflect on what it means to have responsibility to the people under you in the feudal structure when she thought a lot about that in New Spring and how some lords weren't taking care of their people properly. And we see here that Matt, he has also seen the High Lords of Tyr who horribly mistreated the common people. And I think that's one reason he doesn't want to be a lord. That's his impression of nobility. But you're right that he's fulfilling the ideal functions of a lord that we don't see many lords actually doing in this series.
Right.
One interesting point about his relationship to power and politics, though, he has this air about him of this like folk hero. You know, he's kind of for the people. He's not a lord. He is standing up for the little guy. But one interesting detail I noticed in this chapter is that he's keeping some of those feudal structures in place, at least so far, in the command structure of the Band of the Red Hand. So his command structure is based on the house rankings that were originally there instead of just promoting people based on merit alone. Now, I don't know if the band becomes more meritocratic as we go along. I'll be interested to kind of watch out for that. But I don't think Matt it just directly takes on the status quo head on and smashes it. He, you know, sometimes, like I said, with his country origins and being kind of the people and the way he stands up for the little guy, he does challenge power structures in a way, but he's not a revolutionary. Let's not forget that he goes on to marry an empress, and so far that we know, doesn't do any actions to challenge the notion of a monarchy, even though he grew up in a democracy, albeit a pretty small one. Yes. Much less does he question whether an empire is even a thing that should exist in a just world. He is a politician working from inside the system, but he's a fairly radical one compared to these structures that have already been there, like the Lords of Tyr. And it's already pretty radical that his band is very diverse and now containing people from many nations. It was just Tyr and Kyrian for a while, and they have plenty of tension between them. But now he's added some Andorans to the mix, who had been thrown out by Ravine. So I'll just be curious to see if the feudal structure that was there continues to erode and be replaced by a meritocracy in the places that he goes. And it just makes me curious, imagining what could have happened with him and Tuon and the Shan-Chan in the future. After years, would he become more changed by their system, or would he help kind of erode the systems that they have? I'm not sure.
Or build an entirely new one, because we learned that toward the end of the series that basically back in Xianqian, everything's just falling apart. It's gone. It's
Oh,
chaos.
that's true.
And
Right.
Tuan being over here, she is in effect the empress now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure at what point we discover that in the story, but I remember it being later on in the story.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. At some point in here, well, when I picked up my half of the chapter 5 here, when they're going through doing their inspections, he is walking with a Dorian, and the Dorian sees all these clues, things like, well, I noticed the farriers were working more with the horse teams, the wagon teams. So he knew something was up. He knew they were getting ready to pull out. And Mat is kind of mentally grumbling to himself that, I wish a Dorian, I could promote him instead of that idiot Nalesian. They have to retain some amount of the structure of the hierarchy, if you would, of the lords. And not all lords are on the same footing. Not all of them are equal. Basically, in tier, you have the lords and the high lords. So there's not upward mobility among them. Now, later on in the series, some other people, they discuss the upward and downward mobility of nobility, if you would, and even how I think some people, you said something to the effect that some people became royalty because they stood fast when things got tough. That it has nothing to do with their blood, it just had to do with where they were in the situation they found themselves in.
Yeah.
I think historically, royalty tended to be conquerors. Over the years, they continue keeping that distance between themselves and the common people. Not that they were better, but in their minds they were better because of their bloodlines, because they actually came from country XYZ, wherever.
This series has a more optimistic view on monarchies and the feudal structure than some others.
Right.
Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones is kind of tearing that down completely. Yes. We see a lot of varieties of how that works in different nations in the Wheel of Time, though, and in some places we see this very optimistic view where you see somebody like Perrin become a lord, and Mat really has become this general out of their skill and out of protecting and taking care of people and having responsibility to people. They didn't ask for this power, but they have it because people are willing to follow them. And like you said, I'm skeptical. I don't think that that's the way it shakes out most of the time. I think people tend to seek power for different reasons, but it's just interesting. I'd be curious whether these structures last. Maybe all this stuff is temporary to help us get to the last battle, but does the new budding semi-independent nation of Manetheren have some mission creep, and you have nobles doing regular old aristocratic things where they're exploiting people? Or do you have a lineage or some kind of succession of people who are carrying on GoldenEye's legacy and actually taking care of the people properly? I just don't know. I think you can probably have one altruistic lord, but then if you have somebody who just inherited that without earning it, I don't know that you can really keep that up.
Exactly. That is part of the human condition. Even look at the United States of America, where we have more democratic type society, where everyone is considered equal. There are many people right now who have been in political power for generations, been in political power for decades, and increasingly there is an elitism among them. They almost want to consider themselves royalty. Laws that are passed that they are exempt from, and not even just laws, but even things, changes they want to make upon society, they are exempt from many of those changes. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is in the feudal societies. Those people with the force of arms are the leaders.
I think if you leave it as vague as you did, people will read that as you being on their side, whatever side that is, actually. So, I think we can leave that at a good point.
Someone will be over you. They will have control over your lives. We definitely see that in a feudal society, and in fact, it's rather enforced and tends not to change. It becomes very static. In a more free society, it's a softer tyranny, but it does creep in with the best of intentions. There are simply those people who are drawn to power, and it doesn't necessarily make them bad or mean that they have bad intentions, but they begin feeling like they deserve the power after a certain length of time. That goes into everything in life: political power, monetary power. If we don't have the skills it takes, the struggle that it takes to learn to build things, then we don't have the strength to keep it and maintain it.
You know, I think our Taviran boys are a slight exception. Like, they've sort of put the cart before the horse in how this is supposed to go, and that they started to stumble into power. And I keep calling it failing upwards, because they really didn't try to do many of the things that they did before people started following them and they started getting some luxurious things. Now, that doesn't mean they actually had a great, enviable position in life. You know, we see Mat had to die twice for this. Rand is going through all kind of other stuff. Perrin's doing better, but he did have to lead a lot of his friends that he grew up with to their deaths, whereas Rand and Mat actually didn't have to be that close to it. So they've each had these hardships with it, but they end up earning that position, I think, later on with their actions. As soon as they get this power, they care of people with it for the most part. Rand has his dark moments where he doesn't. I'll go ahead and say that. The other two do a pretty good job with it.
Especially Perrin. Well, I think Perrin and Mat. Mat grew into it a little more, and we begin to see that in this chapter. We've already discussed that. Perrin was willing to take on responsibility. Perrin is willing to sacrifice and do what it takes to take care of the people he loves.
Yeah, he always was that way to begin with.
Yes.
But but he didn't ask for this. He's like, I don't want this big house.
Yeah, not to be tongue in cheek here, but he very much stepped into that role as alpha male to protect his pack.
I like how you said Mat has grown into it. I think a huge theme I'm finding throughout this chapter is acceptance. He has accepted his own compassion and empathy enough to feel these things genuinely, his responsibility, as we talked a lot about, but he's also accepted a lot of his other unpleasant circumstances in a much more mature way. He has accepted these memories. He is now saying that they are his. Borrowed or stolen is how he put it. They're as much a part of him as his memories that he personally experienced were, and he doesn't fight that much anymore. He does think, man, that sucks because I wouldn't be leading an army if I didn't have all this stuff. I don't want to be a hero. But he does recognize that it probably keeps him safer, so he's not this naked target to the Forsaken, as he put it. Now that he's got an army around him, that's probably a good thing for him. And because he's got something to do. I think he even accepts and recognizes that he needs something to keep him busy, and that it's a good thing he's got these people to be responsible for. Yes. He also accepts that he will have a place in the last battle. Now, we saw him mention that, I think, in our previous episode. That was the first time he had, or maybe the one before, the first time he had acknowledged that he has a place in the last battle. Right. He did not accept it or say that he wanted to, but he's just like, yeah, Moiraine says I'm part of this too, or whatever. Right. This time, he consciously thinks that he knows he has a place in the last battle, and he doesn't want to, but he's going to do what he has to do. Now, he's not accepting being Taviran and having to be in the last battle as a gift, but he is accepting that as just a circumstance he has to work with. It's not something he can fight anymore. Right. And I think the fact that he's not constantly trying to problem solve and fight his circumstances is a huge, huge step for him.
And you see that Mat is especially good or especially mature when he's with the band. I would say that the Band of the Red Hand is good for Mat, because once he gets to Salidar and is separated from the band, he becomes more like the old Mat again.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I can look back in my own life and I can see that sometimes I act better when I'm around certain people. Mm-hmm. There have been career choices I made that when I was in that job, I believe I was a better man than when I was not in that position.
When he gets to the point where he's goofing off around Egwene and Nynaeve and Elaine again, I think that is pretty normal, like you were saying. I think many of us, for many young adults especially, we might turn into a teenager when we go back home. Yes. We kind of fall into our same patterns of the way we interacted with our parents and siblings. Just being around Nynaeve, who used to be an authority figure. I mean, they don't have school. So I think of Nynaeve almost like the
old school marm.
Yes. Yeah. She was an authority who would whoop people with that stick. And so he is going to turn into good old roguish, mischievous Mat when he's around that authority figure again. Exactly. As just muscle memory almost.
Yes, yeah. Reflexively, he becomes the scoundrel again. And as well, he has a lot of time on his hands at that point.
Yeah, and we know that's not good for him.
Mat is not a person that needs to be bored. And I can trace back in my own life a lot of the really stupid things I did grew out of boredom. we were talking before about his acceptance of things, and you're so right, his acceptance of memories. And there's one point in here that I noticed that I do not recall this from any of the other Mat points of view before this, where it's talked about the flag they have, the band of the red hand. You know, we see it as just a red hand on a white field. But as they're moving out of Meron here, they describe that there's a motto as well below it. Duve ande se tovia sagen, meaning it's time to toss the dice. So Mat even took the old tongue, you know, the way he tends to throw that out there, and that phrase especially is used several times, sometimes without even knowing it until after the fact. And he's accepted that as being who he is, and that he's going to lead the band, but he's going to lead them his way. And I like that. I like that he can just begin saying, okay, this is who I am, so I'm going to own it. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to fight it. I'm going to own it. He still has some of the reflexive habits that he's had before. When he quoted from Kumadrin, the great general of the past, Telemanus asked him, well, who is Kumadrin? Yeah. And Mat kind of thinks about it a moment, says, a general, dead a long time. I read his book once. And he remembered reading it anyway, more than once, but he doubted a copy existed anywhere now. End quote on that. I do like that he still just kind of reflexively throws out there, oh, just a dead general sometime. You know, died a long time ago. I read the book once. Yeah. Which is so like Mat to just want to change the subject. So even though he's accepted even these memories as part of who he is, he doesn't want to share that with people. He doesn't want people to look at him as being an oddball weirdo. So he'll be very odd and weird in trying not to let people know that.
True. It is a nice little callback almost to when Moiraine tumbled out of the doorway and found him and Rand there, you know, asked where they found out about it in Tyr. And, you know, Rand's like, oh yeah, I read it in so-and-so and so-and-so books. And Mat goes, I do read sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very much a
it was. There's a lot of kind of callbacks in this chapter. I think it is such a good recap of what Mat's been through and kind of an update. And a lot of these things are still very, very Mat. I've been talking about the ways that he's changing, but some things are still the same. His story is often very physical. And even though there's not a lot of action here, it's funny that we say that because half the chapter is dancing and part, you know, another chunk of it is hitting some guys with a staff. But so he does get into some action. His story is typically very physical. We know he can't sit still. It's not good for him to be bored and to sit still. And I think it's a relief for him if there's something confusing or tense to be able to mobilize into action. He does that without thinking a lot anyway. So I think it's not really surprising that he takes refuge from fumbling all this banter with Betsy to just switch to dancing. Same with the Oliver situation. He kind of realizes words aren't going anywhere with these folks. So, all right, let's pull out the Ashendari. I love the dancing scene specifically, though. Just him really taking refuge in that and being able to enjoy the moment. He thinks about all these spin-off thoughts that come up about the fall of the 10 nations and the Trolloc Wars and all this greatness he's seeing and how it's not going to last long. But he decides to put that away and just try to be in it for a moment. And it sounds so beautiful. And he sweeps Betsy up in it, too. He's not even paying attention to her, but she gets the same sense from it, saying, oh, I feel like I was in a royal palace. You know, he's able to enjoy the moment so much that it spills over into somebody else's experience. And it's just rare to see a moment of joy and recovery for him like this, that I love it so much. It's also no coincidence, I think, that he calls this a pattern dance. Now, I looked that up, and there are a lot of things called pattern dances, but they usually look like square dancing and stuff, which this doesn't sound like at all. Right. So I think it's just interesting that it's called a pattern dance, and Mat is enjoying dancing along in the pattern while he's no longer fighting, getting kind of swirled around by it anymore with his Taviran nature.
You know, that's very reminiscent of the title of this chapter, which I had not seen that aspect of it. Dancing through the pattern, how the pattern is swirling.
Yeah.
I had seen a different dance, the title meaning, of course, first the dance that he introduces Betsy to, that the world has not seen in 2,000 years, but as well with him at the end of the chapter when they're moving out the band, and he's doing some intentional subterfuge, trying to make it sound like they're hurrying. Mm-hmm. They're trying to do it quiet. They're trying to do it just at first light before everyone's up. and yet somehow making enough noise that the entire town knows about it. He wants Samael to know that they're on the move, but doesn't want them to know how fast they're moving, and all these other things. So he's even using the movements of his troops as a dance.
Yes.
In the larger dance in the war against Samael and Ilion.
One other thing I really like about this chapter is Robert Jordan just lampshading this here, acknowledging how strong the Odin parallels are with Mat. He just comes out and says it. I was hanged for knowledge, which Odin was in the poems of the Edda. So Mat says he was hanged for knowledge, and Odin was obsessed with seeking knowledge and wisdom, but not in an Egwene kind of way, but more in a Mat kind of way, looking for specific knowledge. Now, Odin was looking for knowledge to help avoid the destruction of the world and many of the gods, even at Ragnarok, which is kind of their last battle in Norse mythology. So in order to do this, he went through a lot of different trials. He went to Mimir's well, and the well was guarded by this strange shadowy figure named Mimir, who was so wise from drinking from this magic well every day. And Odin wanted to drink from it as well, but Mimir wouldn't let him. So he sacrificed his eye, one of his eyes, and threw it into the well and was finally allowed to drink from it. And then he also hung on the world tree Yggdrasil for 9 days so that he could understand the runes, much like Mat hung on the Tree of Life, and came back with the ability to read and speak the Old Tongue fluently. So he kind of learned some runes as well, you could say.
Right.
And the word memory really swims around both of them so much. So Odin, I mentioned he went to the well of, to Mimir's well, and Mimir, the character's name, actually means like rememberer, one who remembers. And Mat has all this memory imagery around him. Odin has 2 ravens that are like spies that go out and report to him about what's going on in the world every day, and they're named Thought and Memory. And these are both terms in the poem on Mat's Ashandarai. Right. And there's also 2 ravens that are kind of carved onto the blade of it. So Mat's just coming right out and saying it here. Yeah, I guess you could say I was hanged for knowledge, and it's about the most obvious way of pointing out those parallels that I think one could find.
That is so awesome. I had not researched that. I'd read where a lot of people said he was very much an Odin figure, and I think you might have even brought it up in some earlier episodes, but I did not know how many of those parallels were in the story. That's really awesome.
I didn't either. I had to do some researching myself, yeah. I'd seen a lot of people say that, so I'm grateful to all the folks in the fandom who have done this work over the decades to point these things out.
Because it may surprise all of you, I am not an Oxford scholar. I have never read the Edda, and there are many things about some of our old mythology that just did not come up in redneck school where I went.
Right?
Oh, man. One little tidbit. I should have mentioned this earlier when we were discussing Oliver. I love Mat's insight into the psychology of people. When he's telling Adoran, take Oliver, do all this, make sure he's fed and bathed, and of course Oliver says, talk to me, don't talk above me. So he begins talking to Oliver. Okay, this man, he's a real Tarian lord, and he's going to take you and get you some food and all this, and make sure you get a bath. And he said Oliver scowled at the word bath, because many young boys don't like to take a bath. I don't know why, but many of them don't. And so he turns it around and he said, now listen, that lady's going to fix a bath for you, and don't you let them stop you from taking a bath. And he said it kind of saw Oliver start thinking about it. Well, good Matt knew, little boys don't want to take a bath, but if somebody's going to try to stop you from it, then there must be some reason. I can't let them stop me from having this kind of fun. And I love he's just so fast on his feet, so lightning quick. He could perceive that about Oliver's nature and throw that one little comment in there just to convince him that that's what you really want to do. It's almost a reverse psychology in a way. Don't you let them talk you out of that. And I love that one.
That is such a powerful effect that they have used it to make children do more math in elementary school classrooms. If they restrict the amount of time that they're allowed to do math, they're gonna choose more math work during their free time that they have in the class.
I did not know that.
So, yeah, it's one that we all kind of know informally that you know certain people, you can kind of get them to do the opposite of what they think they're supposed to do, but it being backed up by research with little kids, I think is just hilarious to me, imagining first graders choosing math time, but it's been borne out in the data. Yeah, and Matt has a good idea about what's appealing to people. That makes him a good negotiator. You have to know what somebody else wants, and
even if they don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, a hearty thanks to all of you for joining us and for telling your friends about the Wheel of Mind. I hope you'll all be with us again next week for episode 16, where we'll unpack chapters 22 and 23 of Lord of Chaos. And very specifically, that is not the Lord of Chaos, because Robert Jordan wrote a letter to Tor Books about the fact that we do not change that to the Lord of Chaos. It's just Lord of Chaos. RJ, we love you. As a tribute to you, I'm leaving out the thee.
I didn't realize that. Subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play, Apple, Spotify, or on YouTube. We're under the name Lajara Dane. That's LaJaraDayne to get notified when a new episode drops. For links to our website, email, and social media, you can visit our link tree at linktr.ee/Lajara. You could also leave us some feedback. We'd really enjoy hearing back from you. You could rate or review on your preferred podcast listening platform, or you could contact us through email at lajaradane@gmail.com, through Twitter at LajaraSadai, or through the website. This is not the ending to the turning of the Wheel of Mind, but it is an ending.